The tray hit the wall hard enough to leave a dent, and the little paper cup of cranberry juice burst against the baseboard like something shot. Down the hall, Marin heard it. The clatter. Then the silence after, the particular silence that meant a patient had finally crossed from difficult into dangerous. She didn't hurry. She finished taping the dressing on the old paratrooper in 9 East, signed his chart, capped her pen, and only then walked toward the noise, where a frightened young nurse named Tamsin stood pressed against the corridor wall with cranberry juice down the front of her scrubs and tears standing in her eyes. The man in that room had spent the morning telling everyone who came near him that they were soft, useless, that they understood nothing about pain or sacrifice, or what it cost to keep other people alive. None of them could have known that the woman now rolling her sleeve back down over her left forearm, walking toward his door with that flat, unbothered calm of hers, was carrying ink on her skin that would, in about 4 hours, stop his heart in his chest and undo 12 years of a grief he had been certain would kill him before the infection did. It was the 3rd week of February, and Toronto was doing the thing it did. In February, the gray slush, the salt-crusted cars, the sky the color of an old bandage. Marin had driven in from the East End with the heater rattling and the radio low, the way she did every shift, taking the 401 past Trenton turnoffs and the overpasses where, on other days in other years, people had stood in the cold with flags to watch the hearses come down from the airbase. She didn't let herself think about that drive much. She thought about coffee. She thought about which of her veterans had slept and which hadn't. By the time she badged into the long-term wing at the Veterans Center, she had the day mapped in her head, neat as a med chart. And the only thing not on the map was the new admission in 14. A transfer from a downtown hospital, a retired infantry officer with a bone infection eating into his femur, and a heart that the cardiology notes described, with the dry understatement Marin had learned to read between the lines of, as of concern. His name was Desmond Crane, Lieutenant Colonel retired, 63 years old. The chart said the osteomyelitis had set into the leg around an old wound site, decades-old shrapnel that had never been fully cleared, and that without the next round of intravenous antibiotics on schedule, the infection would seed his blood and they'd be having a much shorter and uglier conversation about him. The chart also said, in the careful institutional language of people who had clearly already lost arguments with him, that he was resistant to care, verbally aggressive with staff, and declines treatment from female and civilian providers. Marin read that last line twice. Then she set the binder down on the counter at the nursing station and let out a slow breath through her nose. "He fired Tamsin," said the charge nurse, not unkindly. "He fired the morning RN before her. He told Dr. Halverson he wants someone who's earned the right to be in the room, whatever that means." She glanced up. "He's overdue for the Vanco. We're into the window now where it actually matters." "How far into it?" Marin said. "Far enough that I'd like it in him within the hour." Marin picked the binder back up. She didn't open it again. She already knew the only line that mattered, the one buried in the demographics section under service history, the one her eyes had snagged on the first time and refused to let go of. Commanding Officer, Infantry Battle Group, Kandahar Province, Roto 5, Panjwai. She knew that ground. She knew the dust of it and the green of the irrigation ditches, and the way the heat came up off the river road in waves you could see. She had bled into that ground. She had held people's hands while they left this world on that ground, and she had a small, ugly memory connected to a place called the Argandab that she kept in a box at the back of herself and did not open for anyone, ever. "I'll take him," she said. Halverson, passing with his residence, slowed. "Marin, I don't want you walking into something. He's not just rude, he's escalating. We may need to talk about a sitter, restraints if it comes to that." "It won't come to that." She was already drawing up the dose. Vancomycin, a fresh saline flush, gloves, the small calm collection of objects she'd assembled 10,000 times. "Give me the room. And tell Tamsin to go change her scrubs and have a tea. She did nothing wrong. He's not angry at her. He certainly seemed angry at her." "He's angry at the leg," Marin said. "He's angry that something he can't see is beating him, and there's nothing to shoot. The rest is just where it's landing." She snapped the cap off the syringe with her thumb. "I've met him before. Not him. Men like him. Whole battalions of him." She walked the corridor the way she always did, unhurried, her runners squeaking on the waxed floor, the fluorescence humming overhead, the smell of the place, antiseptic and overcooked vegetables, and the faint sweetness of 100 old men folding around her like weather. Outside room 14 she stopped. Through the narrow window in the door she could see him sitting up in the bed with his back ruler straight. Despite the fever sweat shining on his forehead, his silver hair shorn close, his jaw set, staring at a television that was switched off and showed him only his own dim reflection. His left leg was propped and wrapped. His hands were folded over each other on top of the blanket, and they were the hands of a man holding very hard to the last thing he had any control over, which was the decision not to be helped. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open. "I asked for someone competent," Crane said, without turning his head. His voice was low and ground down, gravel under a tire. "Not another girl with a clipboard. Get out and find me a real one." "Good morning, Colonel." Marin stepped over the spreading puddle of cranberry juice and the wreck of the breakfast tray, and set her own tray down on the bedside table, out of his reach. "I'm Quill. I'm your nurse now, and you're done throwing food, because someone has to mop that, and it isn't going to be the 80-year-old gentleman across the hall." His head came around, pale blue eyes, sharp as new ice, sizing her the way she'd been sized her whole adult life. Height, build, threat level, worth. He saw a woman somewhere in her 30s, dark hair scraped back into a tight knot. No makeup, no rings, navy scrubs without a wrinkle in them. He clearly filed her under negligible. "I don't want you," he said. "I want a doctor, a man, if this hospital still employs any. I have spent my life around people who actually understand consequence. And I am not going to let some civilian put a needle in me because she watched a video about it. Do you understand what you're looking at? Do you have the first idea who I am? You're the patient in room 14 with a femur full of infection," Marin said and snapped on her gloves. The purple nitrile cracked against her wrists, and the medication on this tray needs to go into you soon, because the bug in your leg is about 3 days from your bloodstream, and once it's there, I can't promise you a fourth. The doctor you want is in clinic. The man you want doesn't exist. You've got me. Right arm." The color came up in his face, blotched and quick. "You don't speak to me like that." "I just did. Get out." His voice dropped, and that was worse than the shouting because it went flat and quiet and terribly even. The register of a man who had given orders that ended lives and expected them obeyed. "Get someone else. Get me anyone who has earned the right to stand in this room. You haven't. You people sit in your warm little lives and you have never once known what it costs to hold a line. Get out." Marin stood there a moment. She looked at him. the rigid spine, the sweat, the leg, the clenched and shaking hands. And what she saw under all of it was not arrogance. It was a man drowning who had decided he would rather go down swinging at the people trying to reach him than admit he couldn't keep his own head above the water. She had seen exactly that face on a 19-year-old once, in a different country, in worse light. She knew it from the inside. She set the tourniquet back down on the tray. "I'll be back," she said. "I've got 2 more on my round. By the time I've finished them, the leg won't have changed its mind, and neither will I." She peeled the gloves off, finger by finger. "Cool down, Colonel. You're going to take this whether you respect me or not. I'd just rather you weren't fighting me while I find the vein." She turned and walked out, and behind her she heard nothing, which from him was its own kind of answer. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall for the length of one breath, eyes shut, and the box at the back of her opened just a crack. The white sun, the smell of diesel and turned earth, the weight of a young man's head in the crook of her arm. And she pressed it closed again with the discipline of long practice and went to check on her paratrooper. By early afternoon, Crane had gotten worse, the way she'd known he would. The infection was aggressive and his body was old and tired and already fighting on too many fronts. When she came back into 14 at 2 o'clock, the air in the room had gone thick and overwarm, and he was tangled in the sheets, his skin gray and slicked, his breath coming shallow and fast. But the eyes were the same. The fever had burned off whatever thin layer of manners he'd had left, and left only the raw thing underneath, and the raw thing was still furious. "I told you," he rasped. "I told you to send someone else. Did you not hear the order?" "I heard it." She kept her voice level and her eyes on the monitor, where his heart rate was climbing in jagged little steps. "You ignored mine, so we're even." She wheeled the IV pole closer. "Your temperature's 103 and change. We're past the point where I ask. We need a central line so I can get this drug into you properly, and we need it now. Nobody is putting a line in my chest." He tried to lever himself upright, and the effort folded him over the bad leg with a sound he hated himself for making. "You're all the same. You think because you wear scrubs and work in a building, with a name you understand life and death. You don't know one thing about it. Not one." She didn't argue. She opened a sterile field on the tray and laid out the kit, swabs, drape, the introducer working with her back half turned to him so he couldn't see her face. "Lie back, Colonel. You're straining your heart, and your heart is the one organ in here I actually can't fix. Don't manage me." His good fist came down on the mattress and knocked the water jug off the side table, plastic cracking, ice scattering across the floor. "You want to talk to me about pain? You've never seen it. You sit in your clean rooms and complain about your shifts, while better people than you will ever meet bled out in the dirt and called for their mothers and got nothing back but more dirt." Marin went still. She had a swab between 2 fingers, and she did not move it. "You want to know about pain," he said, and his voice broke open along some old seam, and she understood that the fever had pulled him loose from the present, and he wasn't entirely in the room with her anymore. Try writing the letter. Try writing the letter to a mother that says her boy isn't coming home off Route Summit because some animal buried a bomb under a road I told them to walk down. Try carrying that. "You don't get to lecture me. You've never held the line." He was panting, his eyes wide and gone somewhere she couldn't follow. "Brannigan," he said, and the name came out of him like it was being torn loose by the roots. "Corporal Brannigan. Private Cardno. I gave the order. I sent them down that road. Me. So don't you dare stand there in your tidy little life and tell me you understand what it is to bleed." The monitor beeped its steady, urgent rhythm into the quiet. Marin lowered the swab slowly to the tray. She did not call for the doctor. She did not press the button on the wall. She crossed the room and turned the latch on the door, the bolt going home with a small final click, and then she walked to the window and drew the blinds all the way down. So the bright gray afternoon went soft and brown, and the room shrank to the two of them and the machines. Crane blinked at her, some part of his combat brain flickering awake even now, suspicious of a closed door and a dimmed room. "What are you doing?" he said. She came to the foot of his bed. She reached up and unclipped the hospital badge from her collar and set it down on the table, face up, the laminated M, Quill, RN, catching the low light. Then she took the cuff of her left sleeve in her right hand. "You keep talking about the road," she said, and her voice had changed. It was lower now, and it had grit in it, and it carried a weight that had nothing to do with the floor she was standing on. "You keep talking about the dust and the heat and the boys who were 19. You said Cardno, Private Cardno. He carried a harmonica he couldn't play, and he'd sit on the back ramp at last light and murder the same 4 notes until somebody threw a boot at him." She pushed the dark fabric up past her elbow. "You," said Corporal Brannigan. His breath caught. The fever haze tore for half a second and something underneath it surfaced, frightened. How? How do you?" She turned her forearm into the light of the overhead exam lamp. There, set deep into the inside of her arm, faded to soft charcoal but unmistakable, was a tattoo. Not delicate, not pretty, nothing a civilian would have chosen. A rod of Asclepius, the staff and serpent of the medics, and twined around it a single maple leaf, and beneath the two of them, in plain block letters that had gone a little blurred over 12 years under the sun and the years, the words she watched land on him one at a time. Task Force Kanda R, and under that, the roto, and under that, a single word. "I was there," Marin said. "I was a medical technician attached to your battle group. I ate the same dust and drank the same warm water, and I was on the ground with your rifle companies for the whole tour. So when you tell me I don't know what it is to bleed." She took a step closer to the bed. "Be very careful, Colonel, because I was the one who crawled to Joel Brannigan when that road came apart, and I had my hands inside him, trying to keep what mattered on the inside, and I was the last person on this earth he ever saw." Crane stared at the ink on her arm like it was something holy, something that should not exist in this room with the dimmed blinds and the cracked water jug and the smell of disinfectant. His jaw was trembling, his mouth worked and nothing came out. "You called me a girl with a clipboard," she said, and her own voice cracked then, finally, and a tear went down the side of her face, and she let it. "I held your corporal's hand in a ditch-off route summit, while the dust-off took too long, and I told him his mum was on the way, even though she was 8,000 kilometers away in Sudbury, because it was the only lie I had left, and he needed it. So don't ever tell me again that I haven't earned the right to stand in a room with you." The old man lifted his right hand off the blanket. It shook. He reached toward her arm and didn't touch it, his fingers hovering a few inches above the faded leaf, the way you'd reach toward a fire to feel whether it was real. "Doc," he said. The word came out of him in pieces. The old word, the word a soldier used for the medic who'd come for him when nobody else could. And she watched something inside him give way as he said it. You were our doc." "I was," she said, and she rolled the sleeve back down, covering the leaf and the staff and the old scar on her wrist she didn't talk about. "Now I'm your nurse, and right now, Colonel, you're going to let me put this line in your chest. or you're going to die in a bed in Toronto 12 years after I dragged you all home, and I did not crawl through that for this." She found his eyes and held them. "I will not lose another one of you. Do you understand me?" He looked at her for a long time. The fury was gone. The ice in the eyes had melted to water. And then, slowly, the most decorated and difficult man on the ward laid his shorn head back against the pillow, and a single tear slid down into the deep lines beside his nose, and he said the only thing left to say. "Aye," he whispered. "Do it, Doc." She worked the way she had been trained to work a long time ago, in worse rooms than this one. She prepped the site under his right collarbone, the cold antiseptic going on in slow spirals. And she told him there'd be a sting and then pressure, and that he was not to move. And Lieutenant Colonel Desmond Crane, who had thrown his breakfast at the wall that morning and made a young nurse cry, lay as still as a felled tree and stared at the ceiling tiles while she found the vein and threaded the wire and sutured the line into place with stitches as neat as anything she'd ever done by torchlight on the back of a moving vehicle. When the vancomycin finally ran clean and unobstructed into the great vessel over his heart, she stepped back and stripped her gloves and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 12 years. "There," she said. "It's in. Thank you, Doc." He sounded 100 years old. The fight had drained clean out of him and left something quieter and more honest behind. She pulled a low stool over and sat down beside the bed, elbows on her knees, and in the brown dim of the closed-off room, it felt like the inside of a confessional. "You were a terror to my staff this morning, Crane." "I know." He turned his head on the pillow to look at her. "I thought I was back at Mossam Gar. The smell in here, the beeping, and then the leg. It took me right back to the night the shrapnel went in, and I couldn't tell what year it was." He swallowed. 12 years, Doc. 12 years I've carried them. Brannigan, Cardno. I gave the order to push down that road. I read the route myself. I cleared it. I keyed the radio and I said move, and 10 seconds later, the world came apart. And I have woken up every morning since knowing I killed 2 of my own boys with my own mouth. Marin looked down at her hands. The memory came anyway, vivid and merciless behind her eyes. The green of the ditch grass and the heat off the water, and the impossible weight of a young man who would not stop trying to talk. "Panjwi took a piece out of everyone who was there," she said. "We all left something in that valley." "I have Brannigan's mother's face memorized," Crane said, very low. "I stood at the cenotaph in his town and shook her hand and she thanked me. And I have wanted to be sick every day since. I sent him to that place. I have to live with that. There's no version of this where I don't." Marin was quiet. And then she made a decision she had carried, unable to make, for a very long time. Because for 12 years, she had been a corporal who knew something a colonel didn't, and the knowing had been classified. And she had told herself it was not hers to hand over. But the man in the bed had a heart that cardiology was concerned about, and she was not going to let him die with this stone in his chest. "Colonel," she said, "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to believe me, because what I'm about to tell you was sealed by the review board until 3 years ago, and I don't think anyone ever sat you down and read it to you." He went still. The monitor ticked up a beat. "You think Brannigan and Cardno died because you sent them down a road with a bomb in it," she said. "That's the story everyone got. It's not what happened in that alley. I know because I came in behind them and I saw it before the dust even settled." She leaned in. "Joel Brannigan didn't step on a pressure plate, Crane. He saw something. There was a courtyard off that road, behind an iron gate, and there was a vehicle inside it. An old Corolla, packed to the roof. A driver in it. They were waiting for your resupply convoy to come through the market. Your trucks, your fuel, 60-odd people, and you were in the lead vehicle that day. Brannigan saw the car start to move toward the gate. He understood what it was in about 2 seconds, and he did the only thing that could stop it in time. Crane had stopped breathing. He and Cardno went at it, Marin said, and her voice was shaking now, the whole 12 years of it shaking out of her at once. They didn't get blown up walking down a road. They put themselves between that car and the street. They forced the driver's hand, made him trigger it early, in the courtyard, behind the gate, instead of in the middle of the market with your convoy alongside. The blast took them. It also went off 40 meters from where it would have if they'd waited even 10 more seconds. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. If that car had reached the road, Colonel, it would have gone through 3 of our vehicles and a clinic full of locals lined up for the medical day we were running. It would have killed 60 people. It would have killed you. Your boys didn't die because of a bad order. They died because in the worst 2 seconds of their lives, they made a choice to spend themselves, so the rest of us got to come home. They saved the convoy. They saved me. They saved you, so you could sit here 12 years later and be a complete bastard to a nurse. The silence in the room was enormous. And then Lieutenant Colonel Desmond Crane, who had walked through the worst fighting of that whole long war and come out the far side with a chest full of medals and a leg full of metal, began to weep, not the careful contained tearing of an officer in front of the troops, but a deep, cracking, helpless thing that came up out of the bottom of him and shook the bed. 12 years of poison, the certainty that his words had murdered his own men, broke apart and ran out of him, and Marin did the only thing a doc could do. She stood, and she put her arms carefully around his trembling shoulders, mindful of the new line, and she held him while the fever finally broke. And the ghosts he'd been carrying since Panjwai were at last, after all that time, allowed to lie down. The change over the next 2 weeks was the kind of thing the other nurses talked about at the station like a small miracle. The antibiotic did its work, fed clean and steady through the line she'd placed, and the infection in the femur began to lose ground. His temperature came down inside 48 hours, and the gray went out of his face, and the color came back. But it was the other healing that the staff noticed more. The man who had dented the wall with a breakfast tray was simply gone. In his place was a quiet, courteous, almost ferociously cooperative old soldier who did every single thing Marin asked of him to the letter and treated the rest of the ward like a unit he'd been put in charge of keeping squared away. "Morning, Dr. Halverson," he announced one Tuesday as the doctor came in trailing residence. "You can skip the speech. Quill already did my vitals, flushed the line, and pulled my white count. It's down under 10. I'm ready to step down to the oral antibiotics, and I'd like to go home by the weekend if the leg agrees." Halvorsen blinked, looked at the chart, looked at Marin standing in the corner with her arms folded and the ghost of a smile on her face. "Well, Colonel," he said, "it appears Nurse Quill is running my ward now. She ran a triage point under fire on Roto 5, Crane said, and there was a glint in his eye that hadn't been there 2 weeks before. She can certainly run your clipboards. See that everyone treats her like it." He found Marin's eyes across the room. "She's earned it." They scheduled his discharge for the Friday. Toronto, in a small mercy, gave them a break in the weather for it. A bright, hard winter morning, sun coming flat through the big windows of the lobby and laying long gold stripes across the floor. Marin had just come off her morning round when the charge nurse caught her at the desk and told her, with an odd look, that she was wanted down in the main lobby. She went frowning around the counter and through the inner doors, and 3 steps into the open atrium she stopped dead. Crane was there, sitting upright in a wheelchair, dressed not in a hospital gown but in proper civilian clothes, a dark blazer, a regimental tie, a veteran's beret squared away on his head, and he was not alone. Standing behind his chair in a loose, silent half-circle were 6 men. Some wore the leather vests of a veterans' motorcycle association. Some wore plain coats. One leaned on a cane. One had a prosthetic where his left hand should have been. They had the bearing she would have known anywhere, in any clothes, in any city. Men who had stood at the edge of the world and looked over and come back changed. She knew them. God help her, she knew their faces. There was Master Corporal Roy Eklund, heavier and grayer now, leaning on that cane, who she'd patched up twice in 1 week outside Spurwan Gar. There was Marcus Ahenakew, a corporal back then, now with gray in his braid, whose shoulder she'd packed and wrapped in the back of a bucking armored ambulance, while he swore at her in 2 languages. There was Warrant Officer Glenn Harmon, who'd carried a wounded man 400 meters on his back, and never once mentioned it after, the surviving ones. The ones who'd come home. The ordinary noise of the lobby, the elevators, the gift shop till, the murmur of visitors, seemed to drain away. People stopped. Patients and porters and doctors slowed and went quiet, feeling the weight of something happening that they didn't understand, but knew enough to make room for. Crane unlocked the brakes and rolled himself forward until he was a few feet from her, and he looked up, and his pale eyes were clear now, washed clean, full to the brim. "Doc," he said, and his voice carried all the way across that big bright room. "For 12 years we thought we'd left our angel back in the valley. We never knew she got out. We never knew she was right here, the whole time, still at it, still pulling people out of the fire." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and drew out a small wooden box, worn smooth at the corners, and held it up to her in both hands. Marin's own hands were not steady when she took it. She thumbed the little brass catch and lifted the lid, and inside, on a bed of faded felt, was not a medal and not a coin. It was a pair of dog tags, the stamped metal dulled and scratched and gone soft at the edges from years of being held. She tilted them to the light and read the name pressed into the steel. Brannigan, J, and his service number under it, and his blood type, the same line she'd read off a tag exactly like this one in a ditch in another country while she worked. "His mother gave me those in Sudbury 5 years ago," Crane said, low and rough. "She told me to hold them until I found some peace." "I found it, Doc? You gave it to me. You were the last hand he held, and you're the one who finally brought him home to me. So they're yours. They were always going to be yours. I just had to find you first." The tears came down Marin's face, and she didn't try to stop them. She closed her hand around the tags and pressed them to her chest, the cold steel against the warmth of her, and she looked up and made herself meet every one of those 6 pairs of eyes, and every one of them was crying too, openly. 6 hard old men in a hospital lobby with their faces wet and unashamed. "Battle group," Harmon said quietly, and then, louder, the word ringing off the atrium glass. "Shun." 6 pairs of heels came together, and Crane, with the legs still wrapped and the line just out and the pain plain on his face, put his hands on the arms of the wheelchair and pushed himself up out of it onto his feet, and stood swaying straight as he could make himself, because some things you do not do sitting down. As one, the men of that old Panjwai battle group raised their right hands to the brims of their hats and held a salute. A colonel and his soldiers saluting a corporal, a medic, a doc, which broke every line of protocol in the book and meant more than any protocol ever could. They were not saluting her rank. They had never cared about her rank. They were saluting the woman who had crawled to them when the air was full of metal and had decided every single time that they were worth dying for. Marin stood in the gold winter light with the dog tags against her heart, and she brought her own hand up, slow and certain, and returned it. Her arm was steady now. Down the inside of her sleeve, hidden against her skin, the staff and the serpent and the single faded maple leaf pressed warm against the salute, and somewhere far back inside her, the box that she had kept shut. For 12 years came quietly open, and this time she let it stay that way, because there was nothing left in it now but the boys she'd brought home and the one she finally had.